When you think of things like wildfires, floods, or animals suddenly moving in or out of an area, your first thought might be, well, that sounds like a disaster. But in nature, some of these events are actually good for the environment. They're part of what keeps ecosystems healthy and balanced. In this episode of Biology Revealed, we're heading to Waycross, Georgia to explore the Okefenokee Swamp, an amazing example of an ecosystem that's been through a lot and bounced back stronger than ever. But before we get there, we need to break down the types of changes that happen in ecosystems and how they affect the living things inside them. First up, natural changes. These include things like predation, migration, drought, wildfires, and floods. Some happen regularly, others are unpredictable. But the key thing? Most ecosystems are built to handle natural changes and can recover over time. However, unnatural events like certain human activities can contribute to harmful negative changes in an ecosystem. These include things like pollution, overhunting, habitat destruction for buildings or roads, and introducing non-native species that can throw an ecosystem out of balance. These changes can be harder for ecosystems to bounce back from. The Okefenokee Swamp is a real-life example of an ecosystem that has experienced both natural and human-caused changes. But thanks to smart conservation and management, it's now one of the most vibrant ecosystems in Georgia.
An ecosystem is everything that's included in a space. It's all of the abiotic features, which are the non-living things. It's the biotic features, which are all of our living things, and how all of those interact with each other in this really unique space and landscape. One of the things that we do is try to make sure that we are maintaining this habitat in a way that it would have been maintained in its inception thousands of years ago. So that might mean introducing fire through prescribed fires. It might mean making sure that we remove the invasive and non-native species that are on property. The Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge actually has a comprehensive conservation management plan, and we try to follow that as closely as possible when we're talking about managing the land here at Okefenokee Swamp Park. One of the things that sparks natural changes in the Okefenokee Swamp is fire. Maybe we haven't had as much rainfall this season or this year, and when that happens, sometimes the peat, which is that dead plant matter that sits at the bottom of the swamp, is exposed. When things like lightning happen and spark that peat, it can very quickly start a wildfire. And wildfire in this case isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially when it's doing just enough to change the landscape to where maybe we don't have as many shrubs in this area anymore. Maybe it's promoting the growth of grass instead, which our herbivores and our smaller species might need rather than big giant shrubs that a black bear might want instead. It also still creates habitat for other animals and other plants to start to come in and to grow and to thrive. And that's all part of ecological succession. When fires are excluded from a habitat that should be maintained by fire, your risk of catastrophic wildfires increases drastically. So what this habitat looked like previously, if a fire did start even from lightning in that habitat, it would completely destroy the whole entire habitat. The trees, the shrubs, everything would be gone, and the whole habitat would have to start over from day one. What we don't want is a completely blank slate that leaves nothing for the wildlife. One of the things that we've done here is we have come through this specific habitat and we have masticated the understory. All of the smaller trees, all of the smaller shrubs, and chopped them up. And what that's going to allow us to do is more safely reintroduce fire through prescribed fire. And we'll actually start that on a 2 to 3 year rotation to more closely mimic what natural fire would be like in the Okefenokee Swamp. One of the other unnatural things that can occur in habitats and that we're really closely monitoring is the introduction of invasive and non-native species. An example of something that was introduced decades ago to the Okefenokee Swamp that unfortunately we still find here in the park today is bamboo. It was planted originally as a barrier. Unfortunately, they didn't realize that it wasn't just pretty, it also spreads very quickly, and it can be extremely difficult to completely eradicate. So that's one of the restoration efforts that we've really been working on out here. You can't treat any one ecosystem the same as you treat another because they're all going to have their very unique intricacies that the other one might not have. Here in the Okefenokee Swamp, we actually feed two major rivers in Georgia where people live and where they recreate, where they fish. So how we manage and how we maintain the Okefenokee Swamp ecosystem doesn't just affect things that are within the swamp proper, it also affects everyone who's downstream. The Okefenokee is a really resilient ecosystem, even in times of drought, even in times where we have a lot of rainfall and the water levels are really high. It has a way of just soaking up that water and holding on to it, especially in the peat. So it's an ecosystem that truly interacts. The abiotic, the biotic, everything supports the other in some shape, form, or fashion.
It's honestly so cool how everything in the swamp works together to keep it resilient to environmental changes. The Okefenokee, actually most ecosystems in Georgia, rely on rainwater to keep the ecosystem healthy. Droughts are natural processes that lead to less rainwater entering the ecosystems. When plants don't receive enough water, they wilt. And if the drought goes on long enough, then they cannot compensate and they may die. Some plants have adapted to withstand drought in Georgia, like hurrah bush, mountain laurel, or yucca. It all depends on the environmental needs of the plants and the changing environment. Next time you see a plant or animal in your environment, think about how well it's adapted to natural and man-made environmental change. The more we understand how these natural processes work, the better we can step up and help protect the ecosystems all around us. That's why it's so important to stay curious. See you next time.